Philological problem with proto-language is solved. Part 1. Proto-human or world language is a hypothetical ancestor of all existing languages in the world. An ancient language from which all modern living languages and language families, as well as known dead languages, the theory of monogenesis, emerged. As it is known, linguists have long been interested in the matter of existence of the proto-language as the first language, or world language, from which all languages of the world came into existence. Some of them are of the opinion that this language once existed, but then disappeared without a trace. At some point, we psychologists became interested in this matter as well. Why? Due to presence of quite obvious problems in person-to-person communications. Among other things, we had no doubt that this problem must be related to linguistics because language is an important part of communication. And, at some point, we suppose that the main reason behind all communication problems between people could be the lack of a solution to one of philological problems, namely, the problem of finding the proto-language as the world language. As the ancient ancestor of all languages and families of languages that exist in the world today, why did we put forward this hypothesis? Consider the well-known biblical tale of the Tower of Babel, to which biblical writing in Genesis 11:1-9 is dedicated. According to this legend, after the world flood, humanity was represented by one people speaking the same language. From the east, people came to the land of Shinar, where they decided to build a city called Babylon and a tower to the skies to make a name for themselves. Construction of the tower was interrupted by God, who created new languages for different people, and because of that they ceased to understand each other, could not continue building the city and the tower and dispersed throughout the earth. This is how the story of the Tower of Babel explains emergence of various languages after the flood. Linguists cannot reach a consensus. Some think that there are about 3,000 languages in the world, others that there are over 7,000. It is all about the definition of language itself and the unclear boundary between a language and a dialect. Anyway, research done by linguists, also reflected in the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel, clearly shows that today there are about 3,000 to over 7,000 languages and dialects in the world, and that once there was only one single language. That is, in those ancient times, each and every person, no matter which race, nationality he or she belonged to, spoke this language one and only for everyone. And, as a consequence, people always understood each other in communicative processes without problems. And there was no lack of mutual understanding during those times. And, what can be observed today? There is 100% mutual understanding between people in the process of communication with the help of words. It is evident that people understand each other very poorly. That is, if they at all have the ability to understand what their interlocutor or interlocutors really mean. People tell each other certain words in order to convey information, but the meaning of these words gets distorted in the process and, sometimes beyond recognition, or gets lost altogether. Why does this happen? Because in any communication, participants envision even the simplest things very differently. Consider the following psychological experiment as an example. A group of subjects was asked to describe their associations with the word apple, for example. And it turned out that by the word apple, one person means a huge sweet red apple, another person a sweet and sour medium-sized green apple, and another a small yellow wild apple. Here is another example from this category. The word mushroom triggers the image of a porcini in one person, the image of a champignon in another, chanterelle in the third person, and an amanito, or a death cap, in the fourth one. Hence, the following question arises: how can all these people understand each other in principle, and can they, using pure logic, if the latter subject from this experiment declares that it is dangerous to eat mushrooms because by mushrooms he means amanita, then the other three, who associate this word with non-poisonous species of fungi, might make the wrong conclusion that porcini, champignons, or chanterelles cannot be consumed. Although this is a very primitive example, it is a clear one. Then, what kind of mutual understanding can there be in communication at all? From our point of view, essentially none. After all, the same thing happens when any other, even the simplest word is used. What to say about more complex words, for example, abstract concepts? It is quite logical that words like love, happiness, duty, justice vary, even greater in terms of subjective perception and understanding. A good example of this is the problem of divorces among spouses. Why is it that they cannot come to an agreement in advance, on the shore? Is it necessary to get married and have a bunch of children in order to understand that they are not suitable for each other? However, the matter is precisely in that brides and grooms try to agree on the issue of individual differences and personal values prior to the wedding, but when they use words love, duty, happiness, they mean different things, each their own. And each one demonstrates their own to the fullest once they start living together. As a result, we hear the following everywhere: "She was not like this when we met, he deceived me," and other nonsense. Hence the disappointing conclusion: any communication between people is extremely ineffective and practically meaningless. After all, an amanita is not the same thing as a porcini, even though both are mushrooms. And, since this is so, such situation could not satisfy us. As psychologists and people engaged in research, and we began to look for a solution. At some point we found it, but not in psychology. We found it in linguistics, with which we are also actively engaged. So, the Tower of Babel, one for all language, complete mutual understanding between people. And we wondered what this magical language could be. However, as psychologists, who practice non-traditional psychoanalysis, about which you can learn more on our website, we did not have to think too long. Without a doubt, it was the language of images. Although, of course, we were somewhat perplexed by statements of some specialists who claimed that Homo sapiens thinks in words. However, no other conclusion even occurred to us. We never had doubts that a person thinks in images. It is amazing that a clear understanding of that behind a word is an image, and that a human thinks in images once upon a time suddenly disappeared from our civilization. At the same time, millions of years ago Homo sapiens thought in images, and not in words or letters. As psychologists are trying to convince us since the time of the Wurzburg School, and successfully continue to do so today. We thought that since this is how it is, then the following conclusion logically flows from this. If in the process of communication between people information is transmitted by images rather than words, then there should not be any problems with its recognition 100%. And, vice versa, if information is transmitted not through images, then there cannot be any effective communication. This is a very serious problem that on practice leads to real-life tragedies, since communicative processes are initially aimed at transmitting and exchanging information, and not at emotional and other interaction between two or more Homo sapiens. So, at some point we concluded that when information is transmitted not through images, but through words of a letter-based language, any that exists in today's civilization, then no person truly fully understands another person and cannot understand in principle. After all, as it was demonstrated above, each person attributes his own meaning, his own image to any word. As for universal meanings, there are none. On the other hand, are they really none? We will come back to this later on.